everyone, this is Mick Kennedy from Clef Books. Today we're going to interview Ted Higgs for his newest volume, A Love Embargo. We're going to have a formal book launch with Ted at Neighborly Books in Maryville, Tennessee on April 1st. This is Ted's second book with Clef Books, and we're always just excited about reading his work and looking at and revering the way he handles the craft of poetry writing. And without further delay, Ted, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well. Thank you for the introduction. That was great.
So the first question, I always like to start off with, how did you get started in writing poetry?
Well, that's a good question. I really haven't thought about it too much. I think it came about as a discovery of how to basically interact with myself, think things through, and so forth. And it would have started around the same time I joined the Army. I guess there were a number of things that I needed to sort of sort through, and I found that writing things down helped quite a bit with that. And of course, as the years have gone by, I got into teaching and taught a couple creative writing classes, and I was always intrigued by the way that the other poets, the poets in the class, would interact with their memories and with themselves and each other in their poetry. And that's always exciting. It's like a journey of discovery, I think.
Do you remember the first poem that you wrote?
Well, I mentioned that I came to poetry about the same time as I came to the Army. There's an irony there somewhere. I remember that I was at the Advanced Individual Training course that I had selected. My entry into the service is sort of a story unto itself. I had been majoring in bacteriology at the University of Southern California, and when I realized that I might be drafted, I went to the recruiter to find out what the possibilities were, and they were all excited and told me I could become an Army medic and so forth. But after I signed on the dotted line the day after, they told me that there weren't any schools available. So I picked the longest AIT I could find, and I ended up in El Paso, Texas, as a Hawk missile maintenance mechanic. Didn't last there very long before officer candidate school, but I remember being at the snack bar on the post and beginning to write things down about the pink lemonade I was drinking. So that's my pink lemonade story. But shortly after that, and OCS, our first assignment was in Monterey, California, at the language school for Greek. And I think it must have been there that I started discovering poetry. I've been reading poetry before that, but trying my hand at it was certainly new. And I remember one of our first anniversaries or Christmases together or whatever, April put together a small pamphlet of some of my earlier poems, and I still have that around somewhere. Of course, my style, my poetic style has changed considerably since then, but it's always good to remember where one has been and where one started out. And I would put it probably with with her typing these things out from a notebook that I used to keep.
That's really a neat image there, kind of watching your words appear in typed letters on the page as your wife was typing away on that. That's kind of cool. So you have a couple of poems that you would like to share with us?
Sure. I remember that you enjoyed one called The Bear, and I'll start with
Yes.
that one. Okay. So, The Bear. Last night in her dreams, the bear attacks again, and her son dashes in to see what's wrong. Nothing, just a bad dream. Next day, rising early, she sees a shape, a shadow moving uphill and away, slouching uphill in the neighbor's yard. Could it be the bear, conjured on the strength of a dream? Would that it were that easy. But what are we to make of the attack, the bear? Some problem in her social life, leaving her in the early morning fog? My bear, you ask? Perhaps a sweet caress. Would that leave too at dawn or linger? A breeze brushing my cheek at twilight, a kaleidoscope of faces in the night, every slight twist yielding a different face, the turning impossible to stop, such the fleeting fate of the beautiful. I'd almost rather have the bear than this, a compass turning on an infinite base. That actually happened to my sister-in-law, who had been having this recurring dream about a bear and then spotting what might have been a bear in the neighbor's backyard. Um, and she doesn't live out in the country. She lives fairly central to the city. So interesting that bears are clumping around in the foothills of the Smokies. And of course, those of you that have read any of John Donne, there's the allusion to the compass is inescapably a Donne reference. Um, let's see. This is a poem I wrote thinking of an old army buddy. He had actually um, been in my class at the language school for Italian. This is a friend who had been, I think he was an OCS graduate also, and we had both, uh, before this, been in Vietnam and other assignments. But I thought I would look him up. And so it's called Search Engine Blues. I've been searching for a friend on Google, an army buddy, a language school chum, but no luck. The perfect combination of prompts puzzles me. The permutations of names and places remains endless. At every turn, I'm introduced instead to 1,000 would-be friends, people who probably don't really want to meet me, those with cases pending, those who've died, but none I recognize. His old address comes up for sale, and going to the site, I scroll through the photos, imagining him in his hot tub or behind his bar, holding his guitar, the old cavalry hat ever at the ready. And I must smile at the putting green. He loved his golf. And yes, I've used that prompt to no avail. Maybe someday I'll return to the hunt, trying other combinations. For now, I'm content to live with these memories. His sense of humor, his mustachioed smile, the song he wrote his infant daughter, now middle-aged, no doubt, as fortune's wheel ticks off another bit of precious time. Yeah, this was a good friend. He was stationed in Italy at the same time we were, one of our tours there. And we enjoyed visiting him and his coming up and visiting us. And we were both there at the time of the kidnapping of General Dozier, for whom I was working at the time. Most of you aren't old enough to remember that happening, but it was quite a stir. The Red Brigades had snatched him and taken him to a nearby city. The political prisoners that they had taken before this had all ended up dead. So we were very thankful that the Italian Special Forces were able to liberate him. Okay. You want another couple, or do you want me to save it for after the other questions? What's the deal?
Yeah, go ahead and save them for uh, to kind of wrap things up with us. Um, Another thing that I'm always curious about with writers uh, is how we set up or how we prepare to write. Is there a special place that you have your at your desk or something where you have your machinery, if you will, ready to go at the go, and you're sitting down and your mind's full. Uh, just kind of take us through your process for preparing to write.
Okay. Well, it would be nice to say that I set aside an hour or two every afternoon, but unfortunately, um, I I teach, which gobbles up a huge amount of time. So what I normally do, if I have an idea for a poem, I will, if I have the leisure to do it, I will write out a draft. But usually it will consist of maybe a couple lines that I'll set aside and come back to at some point. Um, I have a wonderful office in my home, but I find that if I'm trying to do a whole lot with poetry there, at least in the initial part of it, there are too many distractions, books and video games and things like that. And so I have a room in the back of the house that has a very comfortable chair, not too comfortable, but comfortable enough. And I keep a binder of uh, poetic possibilities. Let's put it that way. Poems in draft that I come back to periodically. And so usually on the weekend, I will head back there, put on some classical music, and go through the binder, working on poems that I had already gotten started at some point. Um, I find it useful also to have little um, notebooks around where I can put uh, ideas that come up or are suggested by poems I'm reading or even short stories and novels. Um, there used to be a custom back in the Renaissance of something called a commonplace book. And that's what I like to think of these being. And this is where the writers of the day would jot down quotations that they enjoyed or passages or whatever. And there's some really famous commonplace books from that period around. Um, so I have several commonplace books. In fact, the phone's ringing. You can probably hear it, but um, anymore, I just sort of let it go to voicemail. Um, there's probably a poem there too, the voicemail poem. Maybe I'll think of doing something with that. Um, but at any rate, so I gather these bits and pieces, and um, as you'll see in the book, and many of you have already read some of my poems, um, I have over the years gotten to a point where um, the standard size, I mean, this is a terrible way to think about a poem, but the normal length for me is something like a page of poetry. Um, I have bits and pieces that are much shorter, but usually when I come back to them after a couple of weeks or whatever, um, that idea will now, the memory of that idea, let's put it that way, will spark spin-off ideas. There's probably a better term for that. And that will create like another stanza or maybe a resolution that I hadn't quite come to in the first part. And also, I think this is something that Nick may have mentioned. There, a number of my poems have not necessarily a twist, but a resolution, we could call it that, towards the end of the poem. And if if it's not there, then I feel that for me anyway, the poem isn't quite finished. So the poem will start with a line or two. If I'm lucky and have time, it'll be a little bit longer, but I almost always return and rewrite poems dozens of times before I feel satisfied that it's worthy of being put in some kind of binder or book coming out. And it's amazing to me. I didn't think I would be in a position of publishing another book, or of a fourth book, actually, if you count the first smaller one. Even as I was teaching creative writing. But over the years, the number of poems that one writes, if one does poetry, begins to accumulate, and you realize, maybe surprisingly, that there is enough there for a book. Of course, the ideal is to mail them out, and cross your fingers and hope for the best. But I've been satisfied with not doing a whole lot of that, basically because the logistics of it all sort of gets out of hand, for me anyway. And for me, it's more the act of writing and the thought that goes into the poetry that is more important. And as most of you out there that are poets know, it's not something that you're going to get rich off of. I think that the first time well, maybe the only time, I don't remember getting any money after that. I had created a poem based upon Australian mythology, and I sent it around in the United States, and nobody was, it very quickly was coming back, and so I sent it to Australia. And one of the journals down there accepted it and wrote me a check for $5. When I took the check to the bank, I realized that it was 5 Australian dollars, and it came to $3.75. So that is my claim to fame on the money side. But back to talking about method. I think that pretty much sums up where the journey that each of my poems has taken before arriving as part of this new book.
And so we talk about process. We've talked about your first inclinations of being a poet, and your pink lemonade and so forth. But also, I'm always curious as to why one writes poetry. Why do you take the time, the effort to create some of the works that you do?
Right, that's a good question, and probably would be a wonderful, 10-page exercise. But it's a good question, because there are probably as many answers as there are poets. But I think for me, it was a chance to do some self-reflection. And we have events that occur in our lives and thoughts that we come up with. And most of the time, those two things are only just the start of potential analysis, ideas, or whatever. I've occasionally called it sort of a type of therapy, which one does with oneself. Like a dramatic monologue, an internal monologue, maybe a better way to put that. And so I think that's really what draws me to the creation of poems. I mean, it's for example, the poem I just read about my friend. Every time I read that poem, I can see him there. And in the past, I've occasionally suggested that it was something like walking through my house. Those of you out there that have visited me know that I have a large number of paintings from the time I was in Italy. because I was the president of an Italian art group, which was an amazing experience, largely helped by my wife, April. Um, in Italy, when an artist does a show, he or she will invite a guest critic to talk about the paintings, and the remuneration is normally an oil painting or something such as that. And I gave dozens and dozens of those talks. So I have a lot of art, and some of it's fairly good. A lot of it is more personal than artistic, we might say. But whenever I look at any of the pictures, I see the art, but I also see the artist. Um, and so when I reflect on these poems or read them through again, I will remember um, the person maybe that I'm alluding to, the experience, the friendship, um, or whatever it is, and it's sort of like watching an old home movie from 30, 40 years ago. You say, "Wow, look at that," um, and all of this is running at the same time. It's like you're living in several universes at the same time, which is kind of interesting um, to think about. Um, well, it reminds me of Borges' Garden of Forking Paths, where all possible events. You come to a crossroad. Do you go left or right? Well, theoretically, you could go both ways, and that would create different futures and so forth. Um, so, what I like to think about in the poetic process is bringing the present experience and several past experiences or memories of these experiences back together, and doing it in a way that creates a certain rhythm on the page. And for me, that's really important. And um, I, I always tell my students when I talk to them about proofreading, always proofread out loud and slowly. And that's that's largely how I proofread some of my poems. I will deliberately slow down and read out loud, and I can normally catch where the rhythm isn't quite what I would like it to be, and so that poem goes back in the binder and awaits the next run through, or I'll make a minor change and then stick it back in the binder. Um, but yeah, that's sort of where uh, what I think of when I think of the process and um, what causes me to be drawn to this particular form.
Well, you mentioned that poetry is a form of therapy for us all, uh, a heuristic, a process of discovery as well. So, what have you discovered about yourself? What has poetry helped you to heal, if you will?
Huh. Well, yeah, there are a number of obviously one of the discoveries, and I think that any other possible answer sort of goes into this as well, and that is that to discover a certain depth of self, um, the joys and sadnesses of one's life, um, and I mean, there are ways of addressing that. I know a lot of people who maybe to avoid that possibility um, pile things up on themselves, take on maybe too many responsibilities, play video games all the time. Not that I don't do that occasionally, or just in order to stay on the surface rather than to explore the depths of one's individuality, which can be a scary proposition because when you go into any depth at all, you begin to become aware that there's a certain we can call it a responsibility in being human, and I think that for me, that's one of the things that poetry allows me to do, or maybe we can call it a vehicle. Um, um, I when I first started teaching at the college level, I was teaching at West Point, and the department was the Department of Philosophy and Literature. I had just finished my bachelor's in literature. Actually, I ended up getting 3 masters at the same time from Oklahoma University. Um, and I studied for my Latin masters under Richard Wallace, who was one of the principal Neoplatonist scholars of the world. Um, and so when I got to West Point, they invited me to teach philosophy rather than literature. I was actually teaching both. But one of the fields of philosophy that I was excited to discover or explore was the was mysticism, Christian and otherwise. And most systems of mysticism are, again, vehicles for the discovery of some kind of deeper meaning or self or whatever it is. And so all of that sort of factored um, into what I think about or consider a spur towards my enthusiasm for writing poetry. Um, and again, it's sort of it takes a good bit of courage. Not that I'm patting myself on the back here, but um, to really um, look at who you are as an individual. Maybe we all as adults have a certain responsibility to think in that way. Um, but I think that it's almost if you are going to be a poet, that is a responsibility that you have to yourself and to your readers, um, to be honest and fair about the journey of discovery that you have set yourself on. That's probably enough philosophy for the afternoon.
And so we have a couple more poems that you wanted to share with us.
Sure. I have one here. I mentioned that I was at West Point, and at West Point they have the department I was teaching in has an annual celebration. It's like a hail and farewell. It's called the annual athletic endeavor. It's not. It's like a giant picnic, but it's a picnic sort of gone out of control with lobsters and tuxedos and things like that. But it's held in a recreational area on one of the uh, lakes, one of the ponds on West Point. Most people, when they think of the academy, uh, if they haven't visited, or even maybe if they have, they know West Point as a school. I was going to say Citadel, but that title's already been taken by another military college. Um, it sits on the banks of the Hudson, but the land that is controlled by the academy goes inland from the river, and there are a number of training areas there. And I mentioned that in the poem. But it was a wonderful experience teaching there. I taught literature and philosophy and ran the creative writing club, and their clubs are called seminars. And I've shown Mick a couple pictures of some of the poets. Being close to New York, I was able to invite a number of really wonderful poets up to do readings at West Point. Couldn't give them a whole lot of money for an honorarium, but many of them were very curious about the Academy, and maybe even surprised that we had a creative writing seminar there. We had, being on the river, we had a number of boats that had been confiscated down in Florida from the drug trade, and the department could check out boats, and we would have floating receptions on the Hudson with the poets that had come to read up at West Point. But this particular event happens on one of the lakes, and the poem is called Round Pond, and I identify the spot, Round Pond Recreation Area, West Point, New York. The annual athletic endeavor, it was called, although it was neither athletic nor an endeavor, but rather an excuse to gather, champagne and lobster, a picnic for princes, doubtless now scattered like leaves newly fallen. The pond itself, a marvelous backdrop, a quiet reserve, secluded, not far from the training fields, a curious counterpoint. Inside the lodge, there'd be music, sweeping introductions of new instructors, and kudos for work done. Professors of English and philosophy in repose. I imagine myself sitting there now, musing, watching the geese circle like old saber jets about to land, a soft wind rippling the dark surface, waves whispering like lost comrades, the rental boats docked by the lodge, beating softly against their moorings, as retreat sounds in the distance, and for a moment the world stops to salute in the Dempsey light as I await the cool drape of darkness, the evening's pall, the bonfire sparks of the vibrant stars. There's some military references in there. One that most of you will be too young to recognize. And when we were flying saber jets in the American Air Force back in the 50s and 60s, or 40s and 50s really, the jets would cruise at a standard altitude up until they reached the destination to the next airbase, and then rather than reduce their altitude as they were coming in for a landing, they would stay at the high altitude, but then peel off one by one, usually counterclockwise, and in the sweep, in the arc that they made, they would reduce their altitude and come in for a landing as individual aircraft. And I thought, well, for me, it was kind of interesting to write about a military post, seeing geese flying and imagining them as though they were saber jets coming in for a landing. So see the saber jet waiting along with their feet in the water and so forth. Kind of interesting. But that's a memory from back when I was young. My father was in the Air Force, and a particular memory of my time in Japan. We were living on the island of Hokkaido in the north, and this was a base that had been a Japanese base. We had put in the runway, but the old roads on the installation were the old Jap Zero runways, and the American unit that was there was very reduced. This was right after the Korean War, so there were few children, and I would wander around the old Jap Zero hangars, finding aircraft parts and so forth. The hangars were, I'm sure they had other hangars, but the ones I'm thinking of particularly were made out of concrete or cement, whatever that was, and as though it was half of a hill, and they grew grass along the top of it. Obviously, it was meant to look like, from the air, like a hill. Of course, if you look closely enough, you had a half dozen half hills around. It was very curious. But a number of opportunities during the years that we lived there to wander around on fairly free, open base. So I had a lot of Japanese friends, and would go down to Chitose, which was the city. Most everybody was walking or riding bicycles. Very few cars. Um, Women cleaning their laundry in the stream that ran through the town. Sumo wrestling in the market square, public bathhouses, and so forth. A lot of memories. Um, I'm not sure that we have enough tape to record all of them, so I'll go on to the next poem. But of course, all of these memories are stacking on top of one another as I'm marching through the poem. This was the next poem I'm planning to read is one is entitled "On Discovering that Theodorakis Lived," and this is Theodorakis is a Greek composer whom we fell in love with when we were at Monterey Language School taking the Greek course before being assigned to Greece. I had the pleasure of commanding a number of American Army missile units around Athens. We were co-located with the Greek Air Force, and the Greek Air Force was responsible for their missile systems. Excuse me. But I would go to San Francisco and buy out all the Theodorakis records I could find. When I got to Greece, as you will hear, I found out that the junta, which had just taken over the government, had banned his music, and you ran the risk of going to jail if you happened to play Theodorakis music. It's crazy because all the Greeks loved Theodorakis as well. He just appeared to be a little bit too much to the left for the junta. Actually, I had a similar experience, which I will recount, and then I'll read the poem. One of my troops painted a peace symbol on an old wooden fence, and the peace symbol was also banned during the junta, and so I had to go fish him out of a Greek jail because he had been arrested for painting a peace symbol on the fence. And there's a certain irony there of a military person being arrested for painting a peace symbol on anything. Okay, so the poem, "On Discovering that Theodorakis Lived." I was driving to the city on some odd chore, listening to the radio, and heard them announce a concert in Madison Square Garden, and Theodorakis. Surely a mistake. We had assumed him dead long before. One of our musical heroes, our introduction to Greek folk music so long ago. Monterey in the late 60s, and San Francisco with its myriad record stores. Little did we know such music would be banned by the time our collection arrived. We had put a record on, and our doorman came rushing over to warn us. A chargeable offense. Music beautiful but illegal. And so we reserved tickets far back in the mezzanine seats, and on the day took the train down early, waiting then for the gates to open near a toy store. In its window, a large bear beckoned us, so then the three of us went in to hear the long-dead composer perform. What a concert it was, buoyed by memories of Retsina and dancing under the stars. The bear is still with me in my study, watching me compose our great exams. And sometimes I'll put on Theodorakis and look over in my musings to see if he remembers the music or the one who was with us so long ago. Okay, that is entitled "On Discovering That Theodorakis Lived." It occurred to me that I probably should read the title poem. book. Let me see if I can remember where I stuck it.
Is the bear that you mentioned in the poem, is that behind you?
No, that the bear that's behind me, you may be able to see it. That's the
Yeah.
bear that's the bear from Japan that was carved by the Ainu Indians who had villages on the island of Hokkaido. They had been run out of Honshu, the main island. They are maybe the remnants of the Aboriginal tribe that established itself on the Japanese islands. And in pictures, um, there's a fence that runs around this particular village where I would visit, and on it are bear skulls. And it's not. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they worship the bear, but they make money um, off of carving bears. And you want me to show you the bear, Mick? Um, This is
Yeah.
the Japanese bear, right? And that is probably what you were thinking. But the other one, the one that acted up in the concert, is this fellow. Can you see him? He's
Well,
rather
that's a
large.
bear.
That is a bear. Well, in fact, I tell you what, I have one other poem before we get to the title poem. That is a poem I wrote. I, a lot of people have a number of poems about the pandemic, but I only have one, or I may have bits and pieces of others. But let's see. Um, I have a poem called "Thank Goodness for Stuffed Animals," and so I'll read that. Okay. Thank goodness for stuffed animals. And I have quite a few around the house. We traveled around a lot in my military service, and we often came away with a number of stuffed animals. So the first of the stuffed animal children came from Greece, and Greece is if you've been there, you know that they do a lot with wool, and often the wool goes into the making of flocati rugs. When they get to the end of the roll, if they don't have enough for another small rug, they will create a stuffed animal made out of sheep's wool. And we purchased a number of those, but just about everywhere we went in Belgium and France, Germany, Italy, we would, if we saw something that we liked, we would buy it. So there are a number of stuffed animals around my house. Anyway, this poem is called "Thank Goodness for Stuffed Animals," and it's subtitled "A Quarantine Lament." Let me read the poem first. The emails said not to leave the house for 2 weeks. That I'd been exposed proctoring senior comps at the college. Totally unexpected, as one could tell from my bare pantry and empty fridge. A friend offered to help. She was going to Walmart anyway. Okay, I said, a few vegetables and some dinner rolls. But she never came, and I've no clue why. With imagination, much can be made from frozen vegetables, pasta, and wine. Wasn't worried about loneliness, having played the solitary for several years, and still on speaking terms, as one might say, with all our stuffed animals acquired over a lifetime, all shapes and sizes, an eclectic mixture, company enough, each bearing memories, their own narrative, a lengthy silence spanning many years, a new chapter with each passing day. So that's my stuffed animal poem. Everyone should write a stuffed animal poem. Okay, so I promised the title poem. I haven't really read this one in a while. It's A Love Embargo, obviously. And it Nick helped. Oh, Nick suggested this as the title. I guess I can admit to that. And it was a good suggestion. I think it's a great title for the book. I had thought about entitling it "The Coin of Time," and one of my other poems I wrote has to do with the fact that Latvia has a coin of time on it. But I think "The Love Embargo" is a much better title. Um, And so here's the poem, A Love Embargo. I have decided to impose an embargo on love, valid until friendship means more than Facebook pals, and await the embrace of angels that coupled with the giants once at the beginning of time. Perhaps this is but self-defense, avoiding the obvious surprise one sees in the face of others at even the slightest nod or pleasantry. Let that be enough, as perhaps it should be, but a fine patina remains, like tea stains on a favorite cup after many an afternoon tea, or a palimpsest of emotion that lies just below the surface, rising when called, on hearing a familiar tune or word that takes me back to an earlier day, smelling orange scent and recalling a stroll through an Italian orchard years ago. These are the beautiful barbs that remind and promise splendors that are yet to come. And that's probably enough poetry. Although, I don't know if we could ever get enough poetry.
No, we can never have enough poetry in the world as far as I'm concerned. Well, Ted, thank you so much for sharing some time with us today. If you don't mind, I'm going to try something that I haven't tried before. I've been working on a flyer for the reading, and
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Um, Very
So,
nice.
yes.
You might want to check with Laurie. I think, well, the reception maybe is like all through. But that's a beautiful flyer. Thanks for that. And thanks for inviting me to the interview.
Well, we want to make sure that everybody gets to know the authors at Base Clef Books a little bit better. So this was an idea that I had where we would have a little link to the interviews along with the books that are published. I just think it's not only good promotion, but I know I like to see the authors and get to know them a little bit better. That's one of the reasons why people go to readings, right?
Right.
But as it seems to be a little bit more difficult to have people come out, everybody's a little bit more busy. It seems like just another way to introduce the artists so we can get a little taste of their work as well as a little bit of background on them personally. I just think that works. And as I've said before, I just so much enjoy your work, Ted, and you as a friend and a colleague and everything. And thanks again for letting us have some time with you today.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure, Mick, and you're a great inspiration to me as well.
I appreciate that. And I will talk to you soon, sir. Have a great day.
Okay.